Next up is Rupali.
Well, before I start, I just want everyone to take a moment to just reflect on how you feel right now. Because with that recitation, my energy level is just so high, my heart is beating. And that was beautiful, Joia, beautiful. Thank you. So Louis Sullivan does just that in these 5 chapters. You know, it's like a spiral because you're few chapters ago, he said to the student, you are arriving. And here you can see the student is arriving in the way that he is talking, the way that the student is observing, the way the student is creating, getting, his feet wet. And the great word over here is ferment, and Joia talked about that. I just absolutely love that metaphor because the thing is that when you ferment food, and in India, in South Indian cooking, or even just making regular yogurt, we do this pretty much every night. We set, the milk and the culture and let it work its magic, and voila, in the morning you have a nice pot of yogurt. And so, such a simple thing. You just have to create the right environment. You just have to bring the right ingredients together and let nature do its work. So we've seen in the beginning that Louis Sullivan, in the beginning of this book, talks about the nature of man, the nature of humans, that everything that we need is within us. It just needs the right environment and the right ingredients. Now, one of the key ingredients is the professor. And in Montessori, we talked about the prepared teacher. So the prepared teacher and the prepared environment is very crucial. The second thing that he talks in this 5 chapters is the storm, that, something is brewing, something is coming, and there's going to be change. And if you look at the storm, again, another huge, lovely metaphor, that you have these dark clouds, there's going to be change, there's uneasiness, and yet after the storm passes, everything is clear, it's renewed, there's new life, you can hear the birds chirping, and that's where the creative energy of the student you can start hearing. And then you see that the student and the teacher are in harmony with each other. They're completing each other's sentences in the poem. You hear the teacher's voice initially much stronger, and then the student's voice comes in, and then the student's voice is stronger towards the end. And the student is truly ready to be out and about. One of the key things in Montessori is that, we take our students outside a lot, because Maria Montessori talks about learning from the environment. And the environment is not just the 4 walls of the classroom, right? It's beyond the classroom. And so the idea is that, especially in the middle school years, have the students be on a farm, let them look at nature, let them understand, they know how to read, they know how to see, they know how to do their math. Now it's time to apply themselves. And whether it's physical labor, whether it's applying their mental capacities and creating something from it. So that is a big part where children, and in this case, the student, is learning to create by going outside in nature. Now, just a couple of chapters ago, Louis Sullivan says to the student, you're not yet ready. And that's the thing, you have to be ready. When you're ready, and I often say this at school, and probably Alex, who is my student, I've known him since kindergarten, and he's a middle schooler now. He's joining me in the stock with Dave Malinsky. Dave is a teacher at our school. And Alex will know this, when children want a lesson on something, we always ask them, are you ready? And I will give you a lesson when you are ready. And so it's so key for the student to be prepared, because in a traditional classroom, you could stand in front of the classroom and you could, give your lecture, you can speak loudly or, do all kinds of antics, have videos, have music, have this and that. But if the student is not ready, the student will not receive. And if the student does not receive, the student cannot give. So that is a very key part of this journey of transformation. And now that the student is ready, the student is out in the country, the student is now able to see for himself what Louis Sullivan was saying. And in the chapter of the letter, he is now also applying. You can hear Louis Sullivan's lessons. You can hear those lessons in the student's voice. And now you can see that he is actually applying those lessons and actually doing the tests that Louis Sullivan has told him to investigate before in the previous chapters. So this is kind of the overall picture of these 5 chapters. And I cannot help but talk about Maria Montessori, because in her book, and I'm going to quote quite a bit from this book today. It's the book called The Absorbent Mind. And in this chapter, Maria Montessori talks a lot about the prepared teacher. So one of the things she says that, for a teacher to be ready to teach, the teacher must take it to first prepare himself. For one thing, the teacher must keep her imagination alive. So if a teacher is not curious, and if a teacher is not imaginative, and they're just doing their job, then it really is not going to motivate the student. So here are 2 of our teachers at our school. The music director is teaching the fitness instructor, because the fitness instructor is curious about the violin. And this is during our teacher professional day. They're just hanging out together in the upper elementary classroom. The violin is in the classroom for the children. And the fitness teacher picks up the violin and says, how do I play this? And there he is teaching, so the teacher has to be first very, has to learn that they are a lifelong learner. So that's what Louis Sullivan is saying in his chapter about the professor, that, if they are just, he says, if the professor is just teaching you things that they are meant to teach just because they've been handed that from their authorities, then really that's not a good thing. He says, that kind of teaching is inhuman. You really, those teachers really will not touch the students' soul. And when a teacher can create, the teacher has also understood the process of creation. And with that, the teacher can explain to the student. And at this point, I do want to introduce Dave Malinsky, who is a teacher on our online school. And he's also a teacher at our campus. He's an actor by profession. He's a historian. He is a writer. He's a poet. He lives in New York City, and he teaches our students in Worcester, in India, in New Jersey, and Washington, D.C., and now in Canada too, right? So I want to invite Dave to just talk about his experience as a creator briefly, and then we'll go to the next part. Oh, Dave, you're on mute.
There we go, that's better. I guess starting with a creator first and a teacher second. As a creator, I always thought myself as a kind of a collagist. Even though I don't work with collages, it's more combining different stuff to make new stuff. Initially, it was using theater to express historical ideas and not just simply the standard narrative of various historical departments at the K-12 level or the higher ed level, like what the American Historical Association does. It's more combining theater and scholarship, which is, actually going into the guts of the, the archival material and using this great medium of theater to present that material. A lot of other people have done this. And I kind of apply that same model. I apply that same model to my poetry and to my teaching. And the main idea behind the teaching is you expose the students to lots of different things and see what they do with them and let them explore on their own. And if they have questions, to answer those questions, guide them to find more. So let's get into specifics here. So with the India pod, the group of kids in India that Rupali was gracious enough to introduce me to, it started as her relatives, they just wanted to learn a bit about theater. So I was like, okay, just go for it. And we had a discussion of what do you want to express? It was I believe a 1 minute pantomime scene. And so I discussed with them, and gradually they developed whole scenes, even just out of mere discussion. And they were very different scenes. And eventually a third member joined us, and it was the same process with him, just unlocking through discussion and action. And that was about 4 months ago. Now, and very quickly, under Rupali's guidance, we started on Shakespeare. I was a bit nervous, also excited. It's like, okay, starting from pantomime scenes to Shakespeare, that's quite a jump. But they really took to it. Now, I don't know how many Shakespeare purists are amongst you, or how you feel about No Fear Shakespeare, you know, the Spark Notes, where they translate Shakespeare's text into a modern translation. I used to think, oh no, that's cheating. It's not. I've heard Shakespeare Richard saying, oh yeah, I use No Fear Shakespeare Spark Notes all the time, just to get the basics, just so people know what they're saying. And then you can go to the original text and really attack it from a variety of different ways. And that's what I did with these students, and actually really helped them. And now they don't really need it so much. Now they just go straight to the original text. That's what we've been doing lately. So there's, growth and development of ideas there, and I see the joy. That's what really gets me. The joy of performing and knowledge and learning. It's just, I didn't say this is amazing. I let them figure it out on their own, and they did. That's the really incredible part. And a few weeks ago, I decided to expose them to some modern history. One of them said they wanted to learn about the world wars. I said, okay, you can't just start with the assassination of French Ferdinand. You have to go back to the French Revolution. I don't think they even thought about history in that way. What I learned about from Rupali was the way the Indian education system worked, which was there was a lot of rote memorization and repeating what you've memorized. And that might work for basic knowledge, but for performance and for historical knowledge, it's better just get the information and play with it. You play with knowledge, you play with information, you play with presenting that knowledge. And by encouraging play within reason, that's how you create quality work.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to just say over here, one thing that Maria Montessori talks about the quality of a teacher is that the teacher must be seductive. The teacher must entice the children. The teacher can tell stories, have some games and singing, nursery rhymes and poetry, which even if they have no great value educationally are useful in calming them. And so the thing is that, we may feel, oh, it doesn't directly apply to reading, writing, math, but Louis Sullivan, and I think when we read the Romantic Manifesto, we discussed that art is so crucial to your soul. And unless we have that within us, we cannot create. So these experiences in childhood are very important. So I'm going to share with you, let me just see. I just lost my, okay, so I'm going to stop share and get back to, I think when I stop share, I lose the, I have to get to Give me
Yes,
1 second. I'm
Yes,
sorry
there
about
is a Zoom bug, I think. I also had this same problem. You just have to do it over again.
Okay. Oh, there it is. It's just on another window. All right. Okay, here we are. So we talked about, the role of a teacher is to guide. The role of a teacher is to lead. It's not to tell student what to think, but how to think. So what Maria Montessori says, is not enough for the teacher just to love the child. First, she must find the love and understand the universe, and then prepare herself truly for the work at it. And you can see that in Louis Sullivan's work when he says to the student, you have a friend to lead you by the hand. I am your friend. I have gone before. I know what hardship means, and I know, and it means all things that make a man. He can, how can you love if you have not love in your heart? And so, if the teacher is excited about nature and can see things in new ways, simple things like mushrooms. And here children have gone out and collected these mushrooms from the park that's close by. And first it's just gathering, just looking at, hey, just look at this wonderful thing that's growing. Look at how many different types of mushrooms there are. They bring them to the classroom, they look at them, they dissect them. The art teacher had them make spores, and she said, did you know? And when you ask children questions like, did you know, have you seen? Those are the things that prompt them to start developing their own observations. And so the students left some of the mushrooms to make spores. And then finally you have this second or third grader can write an essay on the mushrooms and how they fit within the classification. So students learn how to do this process by themselves. Here's another example, where students go out in nature and say, okay, now here are things we found in nature. How can we make sense of this? So whether it's arranging by flowers, collecting them, making them into an art project or whatever. So in the chapter where the student is talking to Louis Sullivan, and he says, this is at the end of the office building, where Sherri did describe the office building really well. And you can see after that building, you really want something that's going to give you living and beautiful. And the student says, give me something living and beautiful, something gracious. If it be a tree or a flower, or let me look far over the waves of the seashore into the soft blue sky, where I shall know peace of mind, relief from this nightmare. And so by giving opportunities to really look closely at nature, children can have that opportunity to see. And they can experience what it means to be out and about. So this is the farm that we partner with in Massachusetts, and students go there. They spend several times a year. This is pre-COVID, where we would go to the farm and they would look at the farm in different seasons and work over there. So the thing that Louis Sullivan is saying over here is that, whether you're doing architecture or whether you are pursuing any other field, it is important that you develop a critical eye for detail, that you take in what's around you. By doing so, you can then sharpen your faculties and create something meaningful that is pleasing to everybody, not just to your own soul. And I'll share with this. So in this chapter, after the storm, right after the ugly building, the office building, the student goes to the country, and after a student has had enough, he's like, okay, I really need a break from this. And Louis Sullivan is also in agreement that, yes, we are ready to go in the country. And when students go out in the country, this student says, it's so good to live and loaf today. I'm glad I'm alive. I rejoice that I was born. And it's this freedom, this expression of freedom that you get when you're outside in the grandness of things. And you're not worried about the city. You're not worried about things to do here. The children are not worried about their reading, writing, math assignments. They're just enjoying the day outside, and they're learning a lot by being outside. And so this is my teacher, Vishnu Joshi. I pretty much bring him up in all of my presentations, but he did make a huge difference to how I look at things. When I met him as an architect, he was not a professor of architecture. He was not teaching at any school. He was running his own little office and building his own buildings. But he was teaching by doing. So when I started as an architect at his office, he told me that we're not going to do any architecture right away. And I said, what do you mean? I can do the drawings. And he said, nope, I want you to, he had given me an office in the basement. And he said, I want you to sweep the basement. I want you to set the basement with a table and a chair and whatever else you need for yourself. And so that was very surprising. I was like, okay, in this office, there's not even a place where a person can work. But I did take it on, and every day I had to sweep the space. I had to make it clean. I had to prepare the environment, which brings me back to Maria Montessori. And she says the very first thing the teacher has to do, she says the teacher becomes the keeper and custodian of the environment. The essential charm of a house is its cleanliness and order. With everything in its place, dusted, bright, and cheerful, she makes this her first consideration. And so by having a clean place, by having a place where you can work is really important. And the next job that I had was to teach his grandchildren how to do art. So he said, oh, no architecture. We have this bathroom and we need a shower curtain, and I want you to teach my grandkids how to paint the shower curtain. And I had to figure out what paint, and again, I could not tell the students these two little kids what to do. He had told me that it had to be their idea. And so to draw it from those children. The other thing that he would make me practice every day when I went to office was a few minutes of meditation, whether it was yoga, whether it was deep breathing, walking around the premises, coming back to this place of peace where I could then shut out all the voices, all the things, everything from around me, and just be in that place in the moment. After that, after a few months of doing that, he asked me to plant a garden for that entire vicinity. And so I had to go collect plants. I had to go find out what the soil was like. I had to find out what the conditions were. And so I had not done a stroke of architecture since I had joined his work, but I had learned a lot by just observing him. And of course, in the meantime, he was doing his architecture drawings, and I was privy to that. I was allowed to participate in all of the meetings with different architects and clients, but I had to plant the garden, and I got vines. I got, we did a compost pit. We saw, seeds that were discarded were sprouting. And there was just this new renewed energy in me, which I was looking at with new eyes. And everything was there before me. And yet it was all fresh and as if I had transformed. And then he said, all right, so now that the garden is planted, we can begin as architect. And then I got my first job as an architect. And so when Louis Sullivan says, you have a friend to lead and I'm that guide, I really truly feel that I had that experience with Vishnu Joshi. And then the other experience that the student talks about in the book is in the letter, in the chapter of letter. And it's towards the end of the letter where he says, but when a farmer told me the other day that there were 10 different kinds of oaks, 4 different kinds of pines, and 30 or 40 different kinds of trees hereabout, it gave me a shock of dread lest you might suddenly bob up and say that each one of these blooming trees has a function, and the form of each follows that function with absolute fidelity. And you would expect me to observe them and give strict attention to the differences when they all look alike to me. And so, this is my father's farm in India, and he loves flowers. He grows flowers. There are coconut trees on the side, and you can see the ferrocement water tank in there. This actually is in the driest part of India. So all around this farm is actually just arid, dry land. And to be able to create a lush green environment, to really understand how to create that takes a lot of effort and time and understanding of the needs of plants and what plants can grow together. And so I think that with these experiences, I am able to kind of understand what Louis Sullivan is saying in these chapters. And when I look at Maria Montessori and she talks about how students learn, she talks about these experiences that children need to have. So the third quality that a teacher should have is that of following the child. And she says, the teacher's skill is not interfering. Okay, so the teacher's skill in not interfering comes with practice, like everything, but it never comes easily. It means rising to spiritual heights. And that's what Louis Sullivan is talking about in his chapters too. The real help the teacher can give does not lie in obeying a sentimental impulse, but it comes from subjecting one's love to discipline, using it with discernment, because the doer of kindness reaps greater happiness than the receiver. And so Joia mentioned about sympathy, and she talked about, if the sympathy to yourself, sympathy to nature, sympathy to things around you. The master whom the teacher serves is the child's spirit. When it shows the needs, she must hasten to respond to them. And so observing the student is equally important. So with that, I want to introduce you to Alex Welburn, who is our student. And Alex, would you share your Montessori experience from the point of from the perspective of a student?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Montessori education has been important to me. Obviously, I mean, I feel like in sort of a traditional school, where you're just sitting at a desk and then you kind of have the information presented to you on a silver platter, you don't really have too many options other than to absorb it. Excuse me. But I feel that the basis of any good education is the student's ability to understand why someone is teaching that thing. For instance, you could teach me what 1 plus 1 is, or 10 plus 10 is, or 20 plus 20 is, but what a lot of schools fail to implement is why we need to know that. Why do we need to know simple multiplication? Why do we need to know how to divide things? Why do we need to know how to write a paper? Why do we need to know how to write a speech? Excuse me?
Yeah,
Sorry. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties with my monitor on my computer, so.
Yeah, but we can hear you, Alex.
Yeah, so I do believe that knowing why you're teaching that thing is is just as important as how to get to the end result. And I think that can be applied with a lot of. And I would like to emphasize that this is not exactly just with math. This can also be with anything that you're learning, inside or outside of school. If you're, I mean, obviously it's a little bit easier for someone to understand why you need to make food instead of why you would need to learn how to make food instead of 2 + 2 or whatever you're trying to learn. But I think understanding why you're learning something is important. I think another thing that my experience with TEC has helped help me understand is how to express myself creativity in terms of creativity. You know, how creative can I be? How the freedom of being able to create something like poetry or something like art. You know, learning. I think learning how to. I think learning how to express myself is extremely important because without being able to express myself or convey anything, I don't think I'd even be here today. You know, I mean, here I am talking with a bunch of people, and I see Ms. Sharma has just shared my poem in the chat feature, which I wrote when I believe I was in 5th grade for a grandmother's day. And if you guys would not mind, I would like to recite it today. So the title of the poem is If My Grandma Was a Pirate. It's admittedly quite a silly poem, but I think that's kind of the beauty of poetry, is that it doesn't have to follow any set rules. If my grandma was a pirate, they'd fear her everywhere, from the top to the bottom, from her toes to her hair. And if you crossed paths with her, you should have known better, because before you know it, you're all tied up in a sweater. And her ship would be fierce, and her cannons would not miss, and at night she'd be found putting the crewmates to bed with a kiss. Thank you. So obviously, and I think this poem displays at least half of why I like poetry and writing poetry so much, is because I could be as silly as I want or as serious as I want. I could try and change someone's life or just make them laugh, and I think that's an important thing to understand, because I think we're all familiar with Yin and Yang, chaos and order. I feel like that this is sort of the same thing. I think the basis of poetry is not set in stone. I don't think the basis of poetry is changing someone's life, nor do I think all poetry should be about just making someone laugh. I think that when you have both sides, it is the most important. Because as nice as it is making someone laugh, I think also it is important that we remember that sometimes it's more important to make someone think. There's a quote from an anonymous filmmaker that goes like this. It says, when making a movie or a book, it is more important to replace comedy with wonder. And I think that, as good of a quote as that is, I don't entirely agree with it, because I feel as though you need to have both sides. Because if you writing a movie about a bunch of students that just went to middle school and they're trying to figure everything out, and there's this scene where he can't pronounce the word in French right, and everyone's laughing. The meaning is inherent. It's a different scene to whether you're writing a movie where a person goes to space and they see a black hole for the first time. I think it's important to make the distinction between when comedy is meaningless and when comedy is important, I guess you could say. Another thing which I would like to talk about is my experience memorizing poems. Because I think memorizing poems is important to have a convincing speech, Like, if, obviously, I haven't memorized this poem, but I could have. I just found it today and recovered it, which I'm extremely glad. But if I stood up like this, or I guess I should sit down, with my paper, and I just went like this and read it, obviously that's not as powerful as if I grabbed it and I went like this and just wrote it. And I also think it's important to memorize poetry because you're not always going to have the paper there to dissect, You're not always going to have this paper where you can take a pencil and you can mark it up and say, hey, this is important, and this is important, this is important, right? I'm admittedly a disorganized student. I don't think I'm the most organized student in the world, but memorizing poems has been helpful to me because, well, I mean, you can't lose a memory, but you can lose a paper. So I think understanding what the poem is in your mind and not just writing an essay on it and keeping it in your desk, I think that's also important. Yeah, another thing I'd like to talk about is understanding what words mean. Like this is a difficult one for me to talk about because there's so many different ways I could come at this. There's so many angles and ways that I could go. We could talk about how if we could open up a dictionary and say, oh well, the word awesome means awe-inspiring or something like that, or something cool, or we can understand it in the way that poetry, right? If I call something awesome in poetry or versus something awesome in an essay, the one in poetry is going to have infinitely more meanings because you could use it however you want in poetry. I think understanding the author's perspective on writing a piece of poetry is important. And I guess just sort of to wrap this up, I'd like to talk about my own experience making poems. Because obviously I'm not as experienced as everyone in this room, but here are some papers, and these have all of my poems on them, or at least a couple of them that I like to write. Yeah, there are some that I've actually never shared with with some people. So I have one. And then there's some that I have that are recited at poetry recitals. So I'm thinking, in order to wrap this up, I'm thinking that my experience writing poems has been extremely helpful to me because without it, I don't think I'd be able to convey my thoughts as well. Being able to make someone see your side of the view, right? Even if they don't agree with it, even if they think that their side of the view is just not right, it's still important for you to be able to convey, right? And poetry, even though poetry doesn't really have much to do with that, I think it's important that we memorize poetry or make our own poetry because you're just going to be able to articulate your thoughts so much better. In my experience making poems, I have two types of poems, I guess you could say. I have the silly poems and I have the really sort of heavy-handed poems. The ones that the ones that don't really, the ones that don't make you chuckle or laugh, but make you think. And so I think it's important to both be able to make people laugh, and I think it's important to be able to make people think. And so that's kind of what I've learned from making my poems. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alex. Thank you very much. And I'll share this with you that, we have a huge project in January and February. It spans over 6 to 8 weeks. It's an interdisciplinary STEAM fair project where children take in language. It's history, geography, science, engineering. They put everything together in one project. And I don't have a picture to share or the video to share today, but I'll bring it up one of the other times that we meet again. But Alex's project was on studying forces and motion. In science, they were studying forces and motion. In history, he is fascinated by the world wars. So the theme of his roller coaster that he made for the forces and motion, he built a roller coaster with the theme of World War I, was it, Alex? Yes, and he wrote a poem. So as the marble would go through his roller coaster, Alex recited his poem about an unknown soldier. And it was a poem that he had written and composed himself. And he just recited it by memory. And so the experience of watching his roller coaster with the World War scene backdrop and having Alex's recitation was just unique. I've never, ever seen a presentation like that. So poetry really does stir something in you that is latent. And, history, geography, science, by keeping those subjects separate does not help bring the whole child, the whole person in being. So, it doesn't happen automatically. Alex was not able to write these poems all of a sudden. It took a long time. And you see that in this chapter of the letter, that it has taken this student a long time to come to this point of transformation. And what Maria Montessori says over here, if the teacher meets the needs of the group of children entrusted to her, she will see the qualities of social life burst surprisingly into flower and will have the joy of watching these manifestations of childish soul. But this will only happen little by little. So she says, before the transformation, the teacher's feelings were just the contrary. She thought it was she who had taught the children. She who had raised them from a low level to a higher one. But now, with the manifestation before her of the child's spirit, the greatest value she can ascribe to her own contribution is expressed in the words, I have helped this life to fulfill the tasks set for it by creation. So really, every child has it in him or her, every adult has it in him or her, what they can be. And it's up to us to create. And you can see the student just creating a little by little, and into this full explosion of stanzas and verses, and cannot contain himself with all the beauty around him. And then it doesn't just sustain, this energy, this creative energy needs fuel. And through the rest of the chapters, we are going to see how this fuel has to constantly be sparked and how this fuel has to constantly be continued. And I'm going to just end this with inviting Dave to recite one of his poems.
Thank you, Rupali. Now, Alex, a quick thing. So I remember working with you a couple of years ago, and I definitely remember hearing the poem you wrote that you presented at the recital. I was very impressed with it. You might like this poem too. And Joia, you might find this as an interesting companion to the second book of Whitman's, this segment of Whitman's poem that you shared. This is called Let's You and Him Fight. War is oft on the minds of boys, playing battles in sandpits. GI Joes and stormtroopers, maybe even real army men. Do not decry this. Let it happen here. Let boys war with toys so men don't have to. Let war stay in its cages, its ink cages, its glass cages, its digital cages, in the minds and labors of reenactors, in the systems of game designers, in a little boy's notebook saying, let's you and him fight. Let it all stay there. Sorry, I don't have this memorized once. And here we go. All stay there. Oh, Herodotus. Oh, Ares. Oh, you ghosts of Leonidas, Alexander, Khan, Frederick Bonaparte, and Patton. Stay. Stay. Release your bloody steam in our imaginations and bring us joy so we bring not ourselves pain. But does not war make men? Make nations? Aye. Dead, crippled men and hateful nations. But I was never at war. I only played at it, hours on end. So let war stay and not bother us again. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. It was wonderful, wonderful. Rupali?
So I think I read the letter as part of this reading. I actually can't stop reading, even I had the awakening and everything else. So I will go back and not spoil the letter for everyone. So let me go back to the storm, and I just want to share one thing about the storm. We are to have a storm, and I shall be cheated of my nap, and all on your account. The student is complaining to the professor, to Louis Sullivan, the teacher, and then says, still, it might be fun to watch a storm. I don't care what happens when I'm in the country. Nothing can fease me. After the poetry.
Wow. Thank you, Rupali, and thank you, Alex, and thank you, Dave. That was just amazing, amazing presentation. All right, folks. So it's time for questions.